Our guest tonight, Don Cooper, has long been a favorite of World Cavalcade audiences. As you know, Don was born and raised on a homestead in Montana, where he still lives today. As a young man, he worked as a logger. He worked in logging camps ranging from South America up through the Rocky Mountains all the way to Alaska. And it was during his days in Alaska he discovered he had a great talent with a movie camera. Within a couple of years, he was a very popular travel film lecturer, and for his efforts at that time, even received an Academy Award nomination. Well, Don still lives on that family homestead in Montana with his wife and his two sons. And it's a pleasure to welcome him back, and this time journey with him to Alaska. Ladies and gentlemen, an old friend, Don Cooper.
Well, thank you very much. Golly, there's a lot of you here tonight. You know, who else is here? And I don't know where they're sitting. My family is here. I flew in last night from Phoenix, and my folks drove over from Montana. And when I drove in, when we flew over the mountains, I was looking and I was trying to spot the car, but I had no luck at all. And everybody was helping. They said, "What do we look for?" And because, you know, my wife would be driving, and I said, "Look for some flashing blue lights." Ruth and Matthew and Michael are here. Where are you? Are you anywhere or are you here even? Because, well, maybe at halftime we can get them on the stage, but we will try because they are really here. That's not just, they are here, all right. Now, if I was here, we'd be the whole family would be here. Well, I'm delighted to be with you. And I just darn near, it's Michael's birthday. It's my youngest son is 15 years old today, and Valentine. And he was born 15 years ago, about this time, in Mountain View, California. We were on tour. So we already had Matthew, who was 3, and it was kind of hard because the baby coming, and Ruth wanted, you know, to kind of settle, but I told her, I said, actually, if you look at it, the shows are booked about 2 years ahead of time, and that's further ahead than the baby was booked, if you really want to be logical. So you just have to pick it. So there were 3 open days, and I told her what days we could have the baby. And we missed all 3 of them. And we just, honestly, we were driving down the road one day, and she said, "I think we had better." And we wanted to talk about this without telling Matthew anything about what was happening. Ruth wanted to tell him everything, but I said, we'll just keep our mouth shut until the kid comes, and then after he's about a year old, we'll tell him that this is his brother. I mean, I don't go with this modern stuff of jumping in and telling everybody everything. So we had a code. I'd worked up a code. I just remembered that. And I was going to say something like, when the baby would do, she would say something like, it's time to stop and have lunch or something, and then I would know. So she said, "It's time to stop and have lunch." And I said, it's too early, because I had forgotten what the code was. And Matthew said, "Mommy means the baby's going to come." So, man, I pulled off the freeway, and they needed an exit there anyway. I think they're still using it. And we went to the closest hospital we come, a crummy little hospital. Fred's Grill and Hospital. I'll never forget. And that's where he was born. And we waited in the room till about 6:30, but we had a date that night in San Mateo. And so at about 6:30, Matthew and I went to the show and gave the program, and the baby was born. And I told that audience at halftime, folks, I said, I think I now have twice as many children as I did when this show started. And I was guessing, but it was right, too. He'd been born about 7:30. So, well, at any rate, I'm glad to be anywhere. I don't know if you had the flu here or not, but that was a mother bear, I tell you. See, the trouble is the kid will bring it home from school, and he has it for about 4 days, and he's feeling great. But he gives it to me. I have it about 4 days, and I'm dead. I mean, so I only had about 10 days to get squared away to come on the tour. So I went right to the hospital to sock that son of a gun, and I was in the hospital 3 days, and I was feeling pretty good. I checked out, and on the way out, they told me to stop at the business office. That was a mistake. They give you the business in the business office. You should know that. And I saw the bill, and then I was in intensive care for 3 and I wasn't flying that high in there, crummy. I had a semi-private room, and nowadays that means 2 in a bed. And I couldn't find a doctor because, well, one reason, I didn't want a younger doctor because I really think younger doctors guess too much at the diagnosis. They just take a wild jump in that direction. But I wanted an older doctor, and I got one. And no guesswork with this old geezer, man. He was. I mean, what he treated a guy for, the guy died from. He had a terrific record. I never saw him. But no doctors want to just treat a cold anymore. They want a little something more exotic. I mean, they're all specialists. I never knew one guy was a heart surgeon, another guy was a brain surgeon, and I don't know who all was. The other day I read in the paper, some guy's a naval surgeon, for Pete's sake. I thought that's... pretty slim picking, I think. And I finally got this old guy, and he'd gone to medical school, I don't know how many years. He only learned one thing, how to shoot penicillin. But boy, that old man, he could really, he was a shooting fool. I never saw him. He shot me so full of penicillin, every time I sneezed, I cured 6 people. He made a fortune in this flu epidemic because he didn't have any idle banter. He'd been fishing lately, or how's the fan? Nothing. He just wham, bam, and the next one, I tell you, had a sign over his office door. It said, "To save time, back in." The trouble was, he only had the one treatment, no matter what you had as an ailment. But you didn't even have to have an ailment. I mean, you just walked down the hall too slow, and that old guy, yeah, he was quick on his feet, this guy, and a whole lot of time. I mean, one guy just came to read the meter, and he was still muttering to himself when he left. He couldn't. And my wife, Ruthie, brought me a bowl of fruit up to the room, and the old guy was in there, happened to coincidence, and there's no place in this $1 million room, there's no table, they couldn't afford a table. So she's handing it, looking around, and I should have got it in the message and hollered too, but I wasn't with it, and she bent over to set it. Oh boy, you talk about a tossed salad, holy Toledo. We're scraping bananas off the ceiling for 3 days. I never saw such a mess in my life. But then I got out of that nut house and went back home. And I'm feeling pretty good, except that the guy from the insurance company came to talk about the bill, which was just slightly less than the national debt. And it wasn't a nice, friendly guy that came the day they sold me that lousy policy. This guy was a different guy, and a very suspicious sort, and he read me the other side of that sucker. You wouldn't believe it. You know what they say in life, they say that the big print giveth, and the fine print taketh away. You had better, the fine print is what he read, and he explained, what a policy I've got. If I lose a leg, they'll help me look for it. It's a great, yeah, tremendous. You get hit on the head, they pay you a lump sum, ain't that a kick in the pants? And the sucker is a group, watch out for group policy. I never understood him. I don't get paid unless the whole group loses a leg. I mean... Anyhow, I got finally squared away, and then I came. And when I started out, which was just the day before last in Salt Lake, and last night, and I was Salt Lake 2 days, and then Phoenix last night and here. Yeah, but, and I called my doctor and asked him, if it would be all right to go, and he said, well, go ahead, but when you get in Salt Lake, he said, and this was his words, duck in to a clinic and have a check with a doctor. You ever try to duck into a clinic in a totally strange, I don't know anybody, in Salt Lake, I went to a big clinic, and crying out loud, there must have been 100 doctors. I'm walking down the hall and looking at door names. I don't even know why, but I was doing it. And I came to a doctor with a discount. Yeah, I didn't think they had them either, but a sign on the door says first visit $30, subsequent visits $20. So I went in, well, Doc, I said, here I am again. So he looked at my throat from across the room. Well, he said, you remember what I told you to do for this when you were here before? Well, he says, you keep right on doing it. And that'll be $20, So we're going to Alaska tonight, and I've spent quite a number of years in Alaska. I guess I've shown you the other film, The Lumberjack in Alaska and all. And old Arnie, remember my old boozing buddy and all? Well, tonight we're going to talk about the Inside Passage of Alaska, and I'll be going tonight with my brother Dennis. I have a brother named Dennis who's an only child. And drop out from Ding, a nice enough guy too, but the elevator has never gone clear to the top in this case. We don't know what the problem is, but at any rate, he's the one they sent to college, and he majored in everything and stuff that wasn't even taught in those years, and cooking and navigating, and he does both on this trip. And we're lost and hungry in this entire episode. So if you ought to turn out the lights, that's kind of what we'll be doing, is going up the Inside Passage, a lovely waterway to Alaska. And I'll be going with my brother Dennis. The situation barely distinguishable from going all by yourself. Alaska is a land of superlatives. It really is. When you're talking about Alaska, you keep using these great superlative adjectives: the highest mountain in North America, and the biggest state in the Union, and the coldest and the deepest, and all these things. And it really is. It's a lovely land, a land of great unpeopled distances, and it's also a land with a great coastal range of mountains. And these mountains collect heavy snowpack in the winter, and then as those mountain snows melt, they create the rivers that rush down off the sides, either side, into the interior to the coast. And those littler rivers get together to form mighty rivers. And one of the mightiest, the grandfather of all the northern waters, the mighty Yukon River itself. And the rivers support the salmon. And the salmon support more life in Alaska, people as well as the wild creatures, than any other single thing. And running up the coast of Canada and Alaska is this beautiful passage, the Inside Passage. But there's a lot of misnomers about Alaska. Always we think of it as colder than it really is. When you think of Alaska, you think of the type of thing you're seeing. And the glaciers sliding down out of their mountain homes and calving, breaking off into the sea and the ice. And this is there, all right, it is there. But mingled with it is another element we don't hear much about. 3 months out of the year, Alaska's a great northern wildflower garden. Great, tremendous flowers like the fireflower, 7 feet tall, and much lesser flowers like the bluebell, and right into the very shadow of the pole, the flossy-headed little Arctic cotton blooms and blows. And it should be as it is, that this flower, the forget-me-not, one of the most petite, feminine of the flower world, the forget-me-not is the state flower of Alaska. And believe me, if you ever go there, you'll certainly forget Alaska not. I used to go up, I'd log in the summer. In the fall, I'd have some money and I'd come back first class. But in the spring, I was always broke. So I'd come here to Seattle, and I'd go down on the dock, not too far from here, and I'd go north with a fishing fleet in the spring of the year. There is a fishing fleet, leaves this area every year, and they'd take you up. You'd ride for nothing. You'd help out a little. The trouble is, all they wanted to do is get to the fishing grounds. And they just steam right on through, and I'd go through all this scenery, and I thought someday I'm going to take a little boat and come up this same passage, and I'm just going to kind of take time to stop and smell the roses. And that's what me and Bones are doing tonight, and this is kind of what this film is all about. And we leave our home in western Montana, a little town called Dvorak, and nothing, it's only on the map 3 days a week anymore. And then this is how we go, more or less, actually not exactly either. Some of these towns we didn't get to, but some towns that aren't even on here we did get to, so it pretty well, but it's the last time I ever make the map before I make the trip. That's a dumb way to go. You know, Seattle, well, at least since 1897, has been considered the door to Alaska. It may be before that, but in the great gold rush to Alaska, Seattle, right here, almost where we are tonight, was the beginning. This was the last civilized point that some of those old Klondike stampeders saw for, well, some for years, and of course some the last they saw, period. And this is where I used to go to get on the boats, because they're all getting ready in the spring. There's a lot of hustle and bustle, and you can get hitch a ride. Lots of boats in Seattle, but the story that everybody in Seattle comes to work in a boat is not entirely true. There are still few drive their cars. And you ought to see it at rush hour sometime. That is really... A guy ran out of gas on the edge of Seattle the other day, and he didn't even know it till 30 miles later when he turned off the freeway up by Everett somewhere, you know. We leave Seattle by boat, and we go up the San Juan Islands, and we run along the Canadian coast. Now we're hanging in on what they call the Gold Coast, neat little places like Horseshoe Bay up there, and then we turn out into the open waters, the opener waters of Queen Charlotte Sound, and went by a big freighter one, kind of a cloudy day. And we pulled alongside just to see if he was okay. And we get alongside and some idiot threw the garbage overboard. Right smack. Yeah, we stopped and had lunch. And it's because with my brother's cooking, you do not overlook any alternate food sources. The neat thing about this coast is that there are all kinds of indentations. It's a very rugged coast. We're the coast of British Columbia now. And we went up this one fjord to this village, and there was a bush pilot in there, and I got him to take us up to give you a little idea of the rugged nature of the coast that lies to the north of us here. And many of these fjords go back maybe as much as almost 100 miles. And at the end there'll be a village, or maybe most of them they're just nothing, just, you know, waterfall and just whatever nature put there. But here's the village of Beaver, and it's a fairly typical fishing village. And they only can fish commercially 4 days a week. The idea being that 3 days a week you lift your nets and the salmon get up the rivers and spawn. And that, you know, ensures future salmon runs. And on the 3 days when they cannot fish, many of these fishermen will go to one of these villages, either north or south, which is ever closest, and then they tie up in here for 3 days and they work on their nets and on their boats and they socialize. And they also go to what is a unique institution in this part of the world, the cannery store. Now there's a store, remind yourself, there's no roads into these places, very isolated, but there's a store and you can buy everything you would expect to, ropes and hook and cable and gas and oil. You can also buy a new diesel engine for a fishing boat, and you can also buy a very fine lady's dress. Really toys for the kids, and it's a great event for a lot of these native children to go to the cannery store. And Dennis and I anchored by a man and his wife, a Bella Bella Indian couple. They had their family with them, and their family was 8 little girls. We camped with them right beside them 3 days. We never heard one squabble or one angry voice. We heard lots of laughter and an awfully lot of giggling. And that little dress that she saw, that orange dress, well, it had kind of been through the mill the day before. It was a new dress. She bought it in the cannery store. And they went to the fishing grounds. What amazed us, you know, they're getting along so well, and there's 10 of them on that little boat. 10 of them, and it's not a pleasure boat. It's a working boat. At least it's supposed to be a working boat. But once in a while, the inside passage gets a little rough. And not really, but I got a weak stomach. I get seasick and wearing wet socks. So we just pull out of the inside passage when that little rough time came, and we go up the fjord or river, whatever you want to call this, an inlet. We go up 3 or 4 miles and pull in behind some rocks, and then Well, Dennis would stew up something I'd try to eat later on, and I'd go fishing. And we fished in waters that hadn't been fished that often. And if you wanted trout, you kind of go up to the mouth of the creeks, you know, right where the salt water meets the fresh. And if you want big salmon, king, you'd fish off the bottom pretty deep for halibut. But we don't really want that much, and we just want some eating fish, so we fish a little shallower and generally get something, the coho or something like that. And we fish with a barbless hook, because it's a lot of fun to catch them, you know. And if you got a barbless hook, you can put them back in. And I think they enjoy it too. Well, I catch the same fish. You know, I mean, I look over the edge, there's 4 and 5 standing in line, it seems. I mean, it's kind of a break in their day. When they go home, they really got something to tell the family. What happened to me today? But at any rate, the fishing is still good along that coast. You just have to get off the beaten track a little is all. And this is a nice thing about living in this area. You can do this with a 20-foot boat. You don't even have to know much about sailing. I think we are living proof of the fact that it's the day the great navigator took us from Prince Rupert to Queen Charlotte. It's only 20 stupid miles. It was foggy. Ain't that? That's about 9 years of higher education you saw floundering around there. You do often get foggy mornings though, but don't despair. Foggy mornings on the Inside Passage, the Canadian-Alaskan coast, generally indicate a beautiful bright day coming on. Well, the fog will burn off about 5. You know, it's kind of daylight all night in the summer. And then and we came into a little village called Bella Bella. It's on an island, Indian village. And they have a store there and a cannery. And the only scheduled contact they have with the outside world at Bella Bella is a freighter called the Haida Prince. It's a big day when it comes in, though, because it brings a new pair of shoes from the catalog house and strawberries from somewhere and maybe a letter from a girlfriend. It's an exciting event. And me and Bones would anchor every night at a waterfall. And the next morning I'd climb up and go fishing. There's always a lake, the source of the water, and there's trout up there. Well, nobody seems to know how they got there. They surely didn't swim. The waters are vertical. And Dennis would cook breakfast. This is our galley here, and this is my brother. And we had running water, as you see there. My brother's cooking we have talked about. I'll say this, if the Donner Party had all of my brothers cooking to eat that they could have eaten, they would have still eaten each other. I mean, this guy's cooking enough to get. And one reason we're hungry and one reason we're lost is these stupid hotcakes. Now, he makes what he calls a geographical hotcake. That is the only map we had, is that stupid hotcake. And finally we ate the panhandle, and then we were in terrible shape. For the next few minutes of this film, we're going to be in what they do call the Panhandle of Alaska. It's that long strip that sticks down between Canada and the sea, the encircled area. And in this area are towns with familiar names. Juneau, our capital city. Juneau was named after an old gold prospector that was going to the Klondike, and he found gold on a little creek there, Joseph Juneau. And Ketchikan's our salmon capital. And Sitka was the Russian capital. And Russia owned Alaska longer than we have. Russia owned Alaska 125 years. They called it Russian America. We go north past that, and I normally know that name, but it's just a rock anyhow. But now where we go is to an island called Belle Isles. There's a resort here, and the people from Ketchikan come out to spend the weekend. A naturally hot springs, and this is the resort owner's daughter and a baby deer that they had adopted. But the water comes out of the ground just hotter than a little red wagon, you know, and it's supposed to have a rejuvenating effect, kind of a medicinal effect on a guy. Like if you take a bath in it, you know, kind of rejuvenates you. And I don't know, I felt about 10 years younger already, and I hadn't even taken a bath yet. We do have some water sports, and I'll not tell you that they're big in Alaska, but there was a guy there learning to water ski. He just only could use the one ski, but I told him when he landed, I said, you'll be using 2 skis. Yeah, well, it not only helps them, but it lets them know that we're not a square generation, that we know what's going on. Look at that rainbow. That is a whole complete one. You know, it's a good thing the Lord didn't consult an interior decorator when he created the rainbow. I mean, we'd have still been picking out the colors. I mean, I just like them the way they are. This is Ketchikan, folks. Ketchikan, Alaska. Well, we call it the first city of Alaska, and it's not the biggest, it's not the oldest, it's not the capital. It is, however, geographically speaking, the first Alaskan city you come to as you go north from Seattle by water. It's a long city. Many Alaskan towns were not built where they are built because it was a good place to build a city. They're built because some old guy found gold on a little creek in the area. And the town wasn't really planned, it just kind of happened. And so Ketchikan is about a half a mile, is 1 block wide and 5 miles long. You know. These boats are trollers. You see the poles going up? Well, when they fish, they just lower them a little and they have a hook and line. And they have a soft place in my heart because one of the nicest summers of my life, I owned a troller for a short time, 5 months, and I trolled a lot in Alaskan waters, and it was a great, great experience, although I never caught many fish. But I did cut a lot of logs in the years, and these logs are going to Japan. They used to send the log over, and they passed the law that you have to saw the lumber here. So that's lumber. It's a little heavy cut. So they cut it up and send it to Japan, send it through the mills, and send the lumber back here, really. And for that reason, a few years ago, well, the mill was pretty well closed down. The economy was not good in Ketchikan there at that time. And the men get out of work and they have no money, and that's a trickle down, and pretty soon Dolly and her friends are broke too, because it all, you know, it's just how the world thing. You know what, when they're all broke, you know what they call them? They call them destitutes. Further up the coast, now we come to a fish trap. Folks, the fish traps are all pretty well gone in Alaska. I think you have to be a Native American now, an Indian, of Indian blood to own a fish trap, and very few of those. But they were an ingenious way. They were a labyrinth of logs anchored off the coast, and then you saw the floats going in. Well, hanging from those floats was a wire shear that went all the way to the bottom. And as the salmon would swim up along the coast, they would come to that shear, and they can't get through it. Instinctively, if a salmon came to a object protruding out from the shore, he swims seaward. Like if it's a peninsula, he'll swim around the end of it. But this was, of course, a man-made. And what happened, he swam along it, and he went through this gate and ended up in the brailing pit. And once about every week, depending on how heavy the salmon were running, a boat called a trap tender would come out from the brailing pit. And this is called brailing the pit, an expression you still hear and read about in the older stories of Alaska. And they were hauled immediately to the canneries, and they had to be canned within 24 hours of the time they came out of the water. And one of the objections that the boat fishermen had is that the trap would catch fish over and beyond what could be canned, and tons would sour and be dumped in the sea. And eventually, based on some of these things, they're outlawed now. There's no longer fish traps in any number. On north now to Arnie. Here's my old partner Arnie. I've told you about him many times. He's in my other film, Lumberjack in Alaska. That's where he lives. And he lives on a float which is 30 feet wide and 40 feet long, big logs. And he can tow what he calls his homestead from one logging camp to another. I mean, he kind of moves as the jobs come and go, and this is his wife. And really, he owes me a great debt because she's a lovely lady. And I took a bump on the head for it. I got hit on the head with a tree and really hit. I lost my left eye at the moment, and I went to the hospital in Juneau, St. Anne's Hospital, and he came in to see me. In the old days, if your partner got hurt, the other guy quit too, and he'd both go to town. He came up to the hospital to see me, and he met this lovely lady. She was a nurse, and they fell in love and were married, and live there now, and they live off the land. Did you see her garden? California poppies. Every place that lovely lady has touched the coast of Alaska is a prettier place for her having been there. And they catch all these things right out of their front yard, including shrimp. I don't know if you ever looked at shrimp face to face. I mean, it looked like something that was put together by a committee. I mean, nobody agreed on nothing, and everybody went and everything's going every which direction. What a mess, you know. And crab, we have the Dungeness crab. We have the king crab farther north, but the Dungeness crab, all of these things right out of their front yard, you know. And in the old days, we'd go out and lift the crab pot just before supper after working the camp all day. And it's kind of a risky business because not only you have to keep one eye on the crab or he'll nail you, but you also have to keep an eye out for the guy that owns the crab pot because he will really nail you. If you think these things are crappy, you ought to see the owner when he goes. And they have a little garden, and Ruth raises potatoes and hardier crops, and Arnie raises beets. And he dabbles in chemistry, and he takes a beet and liquidizes it and creates an unholy old paint thinner that will blow your collar button from here halfway across town. I'll tell you the truth. Many a night after work. Now, you could catch Dolly Varden right off their porch. They float, they raise and lower with the tide. The whole homestead does. But after work, we sometimes take a boat right from their porch, go up this creek about 2 miles maybe, and have a picnic supper here and watch the salmon. And they school up. They can't get up this falls. So they come this far, and you look in there, you see salmon by the thousands sometime. And then above that waterfall, the valley was kind of flat and marshy, what Arnie called his moose marsh. And he and Ruth would come up here once a year, and they would get a moose in October when the weather was cold enough it would keep a few days. And then she cans it. And out back a high tide, in every camp they've had, they dig remember the old root cellar? A house underground with the boards on top and dirt on the roof? Well, that's before the days of deep freezers and refrigerators. Well, in that root cellar is shelf after shelf with jar after jar of canned wild berries and canned salmon and canned moose meat, and they could go without any incoming food for a long time, Arnie and Ruth. We worked there. Dennis and I worked there for a month, and I ran the cat and arch. It's what they call a cat skinner, and the arch is a rubber-tired rig, and the trees are Sitka spruce. Now, this is a hemlock, but the other trees were Sitka spruce, and the major product derived from a Sitka spruce is sounding board stock for pianos. Has the most resonant tonal qualities of any material in the world. What they're doing here is building a road, and Arnie was clearing the right-of-way, so I helped him for a few days falling timber. And then when the timber fell, and all those trees are used, of course, then the guy we call a powder monkey comes and blows the stumps. Then normally, like down here, you bring in a bulldozer and build a road. You can't do that on many of the islands in Alaska. It's what they call muskeg. It has no bottom in it. And if you take a dozer out there and start digging, it'll start digging and dig itself right out of sight. It has actually happened. They've buried a number of dozers in the muskeg of the north. So they build a road, what they call working on pads with a shovel. And the pads are spruce logs, about 14 foot long, that me and Arnie have slabbed on two sides. And on the end of every pad, there's a choker cable. And on the shovel bucket, there's a bull hook. And the skinner does it all himself, just one guy. He levels out the road, and then he swings the pads around and runs the shovel ahead, and levels out the road, and swings the pads, and now it's up to blue top, it's up to grade, but still too soft to run on. So now they take a long sheet of plastic and lay on the logging road and cover that with about 15 inches of volcanic ash, and a lot of volcanic ash in the area, volcanic origin. So and we worked there we quit, Dennis and I, because of something the boss said. He said we were fired. So we said we quit. And we went on north to Wrangell. Wrangell's the home of the Haida Indian, and the Haidas are generally recognized as the creator of the totem pole. And they incorporated many of the things in their world, like the bald eagle, and the witch doctor, the shaman, and the hat. You see the killer whale there, and the sun, and the owl, and many of things. And each totem, folks, tells a story. And some were very delightful legends, although relatively a little too lengthy for us to go into here. But this is the home of the totem pole, the Haida Indian, and this pretty young lady is almost a full-blood Haida. You know, there are more Indians in Alaska than were native, and than were Eskimos. By far more Indians, different tribes. The Haida, the Tsimshian, the Eyak, the Tlingit, and many others. Now we go on our little boat up the inside passage till we come to Wrangell Narrows, a long narrow that takes you up to Petersburg. And at night, I've ran this many times. I used to tug logs through it, and they have the buoys are all lighted at night. And it looks like a pinball machine, because there's all kinds of them. And notice you keep the red buoy on your right, I think. Or either or on the left, I guess. One of the two for sure. But the thing, what I was going to say, is wherever you keep it coming south, it's opposite going north. So it was very confusing. I never did understand it. And I've got a letter from the Coast Guard on the wall back in Georgia saying that I deepened the channel significantly. and widened it too. This is Petersburg, Alaska, and that's the Devil's Thumb, 11,600 feet, right to heaven, right out of water it is. And this is a family that live there, and they're shrimpers, not fishermen, thank you, shrimpers. And it's Mr. Aronson, and I knew him a little 35 years, 40 years ago when I logged in the area. And his boy that's with him now wasn't even there then. And he and his boy are still shrimping, or were a couple of years ago. And they drag the bottom for shrimp, commercially shrimping, and the bottom is an integrated community, and of course they get everybody down there. I mean, they just take a swoop at her, and some of the things they bring out, well, the skate is one of them. It's a big flat, like a manta ray, and they throw these away. They do, not always. Some people, you can buy them in fish markets. They're not the best meat, but they're cheap. Well, you heard of a cheapskate? That's what they're talking about. When they get the boxes full, they go home. About 1,000 pounds of shrimp. We stayed in Petersburg 3 days, and we left early one morning. This is morning, about 4 o'clock, because it's daylight very early, but the fog will lift, it'll be a bright day. And this seiner, years ago, Arnie and I, the logging camp, the mill in Sitka burned down, some of you might remember, and then they couldn't take any more logs, so the logging camp closed down. So Arnie and I quit, and we got a job on a seiner part of that summer. That's also the summer I had the trolling boat I told you about. And I worked on this boat, and 2 of the guys were still on it. Commercial fishermen. Boy, if you think loggers are a rough bunch, you ought to hang out with these guys. He's doing the dishes. That's what he's doing, is the dishes. Yeah, and that's how they do their laundry. They put their clothes in a sack with a bar of soap and drag it 5 miles, and then they... Seiners go just the right speed for the porpoise to socialize. And they do. They're just being friendly. I'm convinced we don't feed them. They don't want any food from us anyway. They just want to be... Nowadays they have fish finders and electronics. They've taken a lot of the guesswork out of commercial fishing, at least seinen. They've also taken away a lot of the need for a great skill. The ability to look at the surface of the ocean and see what was in there 50 feet down. And that's what they had to do. You couldn't just strictly cold turkey guess at it. It takes just as long to make a set whether or not there were any salmon in it. 5 or 6 hours hard work, time you get it back on the... So the guy in the black hat was our man. He would call the SWAT, and nobody argued with him, and we'd go over there, and we'd make a set. You stop the seiner. You dump off the stern, the seine skiff. It sits there anchoring one end of the purse seine. That's the whole net complex. Now it anchors it, that little boat, and the seiner takes off and transcribes a circle in the sea, a significant size, and comes back to the skiff, and they couple the net up then. And at that point then, they begin to purse the seine. And just like you did with an old coin purse. Remember, they used to have a kind of a leather shoestring around the top, and you'd pull it, close it up. That's why they call it a purse seine. Or maybe it is. It could be anyway. But that's what they do. And they purse it. And this is the most interesting part of the day, because now you begin to see whether you made a bundle, or whether you made wages, or whether you lost your shirt, you know. It's a gamble. Boy, in the old days, a lot of the nice homes on Queen Anne Hill were built with money pulled out of the sea in a seiner's net. The largest count they ever had, I understand, was 16,000 fish in a single haul. They couldn't lift it. It was tipping the seiner over. They had to bail them into other boats. But there's a lot of hazards, too. Now, this boat, the Marysville, this is out of Anacortes, and they set on a school of fish, all right, not salmon, dogfish, small shark. And you daresn't just rip them out of the net, or they'll tear up about $20,000 worth of rigging. It took them all that day, that night, and most of the next day to empty the net. Here's where we're leaving. We stayed here 3 days with these people. We're leaving, it's about 11 o'clock at night. And further north, almost at midnight, we came to our first iceberg in the long trip north. And notice the very slanting rays of the midnight sun. Now the sun does set in this area. Farther north, of course, it never sets at all. But it never gets dark. In Alaska, even where we are now, you can read a newspaper on a clear night, we're talking about, at midnight, darkest hour, very well. Now we're supposed to go on to the Pribilof Islands. That was our plan, if it was as much a plan as we had. But it was an awful tendency to want to go up these fjords, because you look up there and the mountains just go smack out of the sea, just steeper than a cow's face, right up 2,000 feet and more, you know. So finally we decided we'd go up around the first corner, and we did, and then the next corner, and we went in here, and it was 10 days before we came back out, and we never saw anybody. It's a narrow channel, it's a fjord, what it is, and this one goes back about 60 miles, and sometimes it's, like 50 feet wide. And what happens is that the tide coming out of there, it roars through these very narrow places, because there's an awful backlog of water back in there, you know, billions of gallons of water, and they have a 20-foot tide. So it's got, this is not a river. This is the ocean. This is a salt water. This is a tide. And they can really fool you. You get caught in that with a small boat, and it spits you back out of there faster than you went in, I'll tell you. And then sometimes the incoming tide will collide head-on with the outgoing tide in that narrow fjord, creating what we call whirlpools. Indians call them skookumchucks. I've seen whirlpools as wide as a fjord, and a roar that was carried out at 30. We didn't ever try it. We just cool our heels till the slack tide, and then we sneak on through, and you come to a place like this, and you see why they call Alaska God's country, all right. Waterfalls right out of heaven, nameless and numberless, and pure, sweet, cold, and clean water. And your first man on the creek, and we didn't want to, if we didn't have to, we didn't even have to leave a boat, really. I just cozy up to a waterfall, and I want to show you there's an open body of water here. And the year I had the troller, I fished a lot. You can do that with a troller, man and his wife sometimes, or just one guy. And in this bay you're going to see, I watched two eagles one day fighting right almost above me, and they locked together in the air, really now, and they come whirling down and crashed into the water. Neither one ever let loose till they hit the water. Now one of them made it ashore swimming. He didn't swim pretty, but he swam some. The other guy I don't think would have made it, so I took the dory, you know, the little boat shore, and I went over and picked him up. I put him in the dory, and he sat there and glared. Boy, can an eagle glare at you. And I just left him in there, and pretty soon he dried out, because he was soaking wet. He couldn't fly. But he dried out and then took off. But it was just water, you know. Thank heavens it wasn't oil. Now, we went up this fjord until, well, right here is a waterfall, a little rainbow. And we're going to tie the boat to the other end of the rainbow. Then we're going to hike back. We're going to leave Alaska. We're going to go due east over the coastal mountains into Canada, and eventually we'll get into an area, they say a valley of vanishing men, although I don't know anybody that vanished there. But you see that mountain with a snowfield right there? That is the international boundary, folks. Immediately beyond that is Canada and a very remote part of British Columbia, and my favorite mountain range in all the world, the Canadian Cassiar, is very remote. We camped that night on this little creek, and the next morning, Dennis was getting breakfast, and I heard a great splashing noise. Now, all night you hear the salmon splashing, but this was a bigger splash. So I went out and I peered through the spruce limbs. And there's about I would guess a 3-year-old Alaska brown bear. The reason I think he's 3 years old, because he's such a clumsy fisherman. The brown bear is the biggest freeloader in the world. They stay with their mother till they're 2.5. They're as big as she is. And she mates every 3rd year, and she chases them off the farm, or they stay longer, I guess. So he's just now learning how to catch his breakfast, even though he's grown bear. The wind got from us to him. You notice the switch there. Now a bear either comes over and eats you, or he runs the other way. Very few go back to eating the salmon. And if you're standing there, you can't help but be interested in whatever he's thinking. I love to watch the salmon. It's a male and a female. They have mated when they left the ocean, and they'll stay together till they die. They chase off intruders. Look at this right here, a little too close. Now they're digging a little hole. See them fan the gravel with their tail? Well, they build a little depression. They create a little depression, and in it the female lays about 3,000 eggs, spawn, and then the male swims over, fertilizes those eggs, and then these salmon die. But the incredible thing, this pair of salmon were born here 6 years before, perhaps within a 1/4 mile of this very gravel bed. When they were 1 year old, they went down the rivers to the oceans and disappeared. We don't know where in the oceans of the world. Then 5 years later, 4 or 5, depending on the species, they come back and find their own river system. But they don't just go up that river 1/2 mile and spawn. They go up that river and then up the tributary until they come to the gravel bed where they respond. In the case of the Yukon, it's over 1,800 miles from the ocean. And they fight all these things, the bald eagle and the osprey and the rapids, and millions don't make it. Only the very strongest get back to the spawning grounds, and that was nature's way of ensuring that only the very strongest sired the next generation, the salmon. This little bird lived there. He's a water ouzel. And he gave me a long speech on space, I think. He thought we were invading his space. He was not happy with us, I knew. And pretty flowers, this is a relatively rare one, right along the waterfall there, called a spray flower. And the little blue monkey flower. Notice the dew, see it sparkling? See that? I splashed that on out of the creek that morning. What you call do-it-yourself dew. Very domestic scene in a little meadow. Now we're high up in that mountain valley, a very un-moose-like place, and that's the reason this mother's there. When a cow moose realizes she's about to become a mother, she leaves the moose range, because where the moose range is also where the predators are. She comes to a quiet, out-of-the-way place and gives birth and keeps the little guys until they can run fast enough so they have a shot at it, you know. That's why she's there. These are Dolly Varden. Most of that trout, although they have rainbow up there too. And if you get in the colder creeks farther north, there's grayling and northern pike, and there's lots of different kinds of sport fish. We're right on the international boundary. This goat would be about half in Alaska and the front half in Canada, I guess. But from here you look east into the Cassiar Mountains. A great wilderness. You know what's kept them such a wilderness? Well, I'll tell you, it's the mountains on all sides of them. There are big, major mountain ranges surrounding them, almost like they were protected and kept a privacy. You don't, and lots of wildlife here. Great caribou country, all kinds of caribou. Boy, we saw a beautiful, I'm going to show them to you. It was early in the morning, cold, foggy morning, above the timberline, and my brother tracked a beautiful bull. Am I saying moose? They're caribou, you know that. You should know that. And I should say that too. But they're caribou. He turns his head in a moment, and notice the rack on this. It just knock you out. My brother tracked him up there. My brother is a great tracker. You wouldn't believe. He can look at the sky and see where a family of ducks flew past day before yesterday. Just tremendous. Yeah, one day my brother was out hunting, and he followed a set of tracks into a cave, and he shot a train. Yeah. A Northern Pacific it was, yes. We still have the headlight on the wall over home. He gets me into more trouble. He talked me into building an airplane one time, and it didn't fly. We've been known as the Wrong Brothers ever since. Now, there is such a legend about the Valley of Vanishing Men, and it's down this farther into the Nahanni River, and this is as far in that direction as we went, right here. We suddenly remembered we should go check and see if we left the drain plug out of the boat, and it took us 4 days to walk in there. It took us about 5 hours to walk back out. We only touched ground 3 times in the whole trip. I just got back to our boat just in time. We got in the boat, and then it can really rain in Alaska. You know, it's a nice feeling to sit in a safe harbor and no contact with the outside world. We don't even have a one-way radio. We got a nothing radio. We have no contact with anybody. And the world is a very peaceful place when you're totally out of contact with all the various peacemakers. And we listened that night and watched the salmon jumping all up and down. It got too dark, of course, to film it, but it was a rainy night. But the waters are very phosphorescent, and about midnight they were just jumping, and every time they would break the surface that night, it was just like somebody had scattered a handful of stars out on the waters. Really beautiful sight. I don't think if I live to be 40 years old that I'll ever forget, the unique beauty of that night. Now we come to Glacier Bay. This was many days later. It's a long stretch up there. Glacier Bay, well, it's a collection of glaciers that grind their way down out of the coastal mountains. Many of these glaciers are born, 18,000 feet in the sky, up in the cold upper, and snow packs, and more packs on it, and it melts and freezes and packs, and creates the glaciers, and of their own weight, they slide into the sea. Now, it's good, I mention that because it's good ice. We use it in put it in our ice chest. I mean, it's in salt water, but it's freshwater ice that was formed on a mountain and slid down. And we went up through these icebergs towards the glacier. Now, what we come to here is not the glacier. It's a huge iceberg, but it's grounded. I just show the cave relative to the boat to give you a little idea of size. In fact, we could have taken the big boat in, but we did not, because the rumble of the motor, glaciers are very sensitive to noises, and they have this bad habit of collapsing. And if you're in there and it collapses, boy, any trouble you had that morning, you can't even remember what the heck the problem was. I'll tell you the truth. So we have a couple of rubber rafts. And I went ahead, and Dennis came along with the camera, and it got a little dark for filming, but we could hear water splashing. We went around the corner, and there's a room there and a crevice to the top that let the light in, enough light to give you some filming light. We call it the Blue Room. I think it's right here. We went on, big, good-sized room, the ice right here it was. And then there's some other caves, but we didn't go any farther. We paddled out. Well, we could hear ice falling behind us, and we chickened out is what we got out anyhow. Now we go around Cape Spencer and into the open waters of the North Pacific, and that's when the storm hit us, and for about 9 hours. Nature gave us a whole spectrum here. It quit, the sun came out a little, we had a rainbow. Then it quit raining just enough to give us a sunset, right? About 11 o'clock at night. And then the skies cleared, and that night we had a full moon, and we camped just across the bay from Mount Fairweather, one of the higher mountains of the coastal range. We're going to sit here and dry out, and then we'll be back shortly after the intermission with more film. Thank you. My family did drive over, and they are, and this time we have them spotted in the audience. And they're right up in this box right here. Would you folks stand? If you got a spotlight, we could get there. And I just want to show them, show you to there. Thank you. Matthew has gone with me on the tour this year, and it's been a lot of company. It really has. But I have been flying the last few days, and that's the reason if I look like I'm limping, yesterday I left Salt Lake City, and I only had to get my luggage from Salt Lake to Phoenix. It wasn't like you had 42 stops. There weren't no stops at all. And the stupid suitcase is in Baltimore, and I don't know where it is. And my shoes are in it. And I wore boots on because it was snowing in Salt Lake. So then I ran off and I bought these dumb shoes, and they hurt. But anyhow, somebody said, if you want to take your mind off all your other troubles, wear tight shoes. And believe me, I wouldn't know if the house was on fire. I don't know how they do that. There's a story about the first passenger to Mars. We don't know who he'll be, but we do know that his luggage will go on to Pluto. It's almost... read this story about a guy that he went into a ticket office in Chicago. He said, I'd like to buy a ticket to San Diego. He said, I have 2 pieces of luggage. I'd like to check one of them to Anchorage, Alaska, and the other to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And the girl at the desk says, I'm sorry, sir, we can't do that. Well, he said, the heck you can't. He said, you did it last week. But you know, one thing I do like about Alaska, and I've been there, spent a lot of my life there in the logging camps and other whatever jobs I could get, really. But it's a more relaxed pace, a little less stress, I think, a little more time to appreciate the surroundings. And relaxation is good, but some fields it does not lend itself well to. And one field that you can be too relaxed very easily is the airline field. And I flew down one time years ago on one of the Alaska Airlines, and that son of a gun, if it had been any more relaxed, it wouldn't even be airborne. It was just kind of happening, whatever way the wind blew. I mean, it was a night flights, only night flights, because if anybody had seen that plane in the daylight, you couldn't have got him on it with a bulldozer. But anyhow, but the pilot was in worse shape than the plane. The pilot got lost 3 times. Yeah, and that's before we took off. That was right. He's just trying to find his car in the parking lot. This boy had a lot of problems. And speaking of taking off, I didn't think he couldn't get that gutless runder off the ground. He taxied about 40 miles, I mean, we went through 3 little towns. I thought it was another guided tour of the air. But anyway, he finally got out in the middle of a moose marsh, but to show you what they do now down here, airlines are no fun. They're very stuffy. There's no. It's either right or it's wrong. It's black or it's white. But up there's a lot of shades of gray in the airline industry. Believe me, to prove it, he stopped out there in nowhere, and what he did is he emptied the ashtray. And then he got her in the air. But it was just by that margin, the whole thing we'll run through that again. See, there's this airplane. I missed you somehow. Might go dead or something. Anyway, you get her in the air, okay. And we're flying along very, very slow, top speed. A seagull flew into one of the engines from the rear, for Pete's sake. And the pilot, a nice, friendly guy, but believe me, he was walking. I don't know who's flying. He's walking up and down the aisle, reading a book, How to Fly. I noticed the title. I'm hoping he gets to How to Land before we get to wherever we're going. All we're trying to do is from Anchorage to Seattle. It ain't that complicated. But when he was up in the cockpit, he was telling jokes. And I like funny people, but I don't want a funny brain surgeon necessarily, and I don't want a funny pilot either. I just soon have one that could fly. And anyway, I think he was just kidding us over the PA. I'm sure he was joking with us about the hijacker being on board, and probably to take our mind off the fire. But anyhow, and the navigator was no big deal either. The navigator, he had just lost a job as an elevator operator because he couldn't remember the route. I mean, this guy was lost. And he kept coming back and asking the passengers if anybody would recognize Seattle. And everything was gunny, even the stewardess. Normally on a plane, if everything else is gunny sack, a guy can look at the stewardess and feel better, but you couldn't feel no better. Oh, holy mackerel, you look like 5 miles of bad road. I don't know. She really did. That's the skinniest thing I never in my life, I tell you. You had to look at her feet to see which way she was pointing. I never saw anything. Well, honestly, she stuck out her tongue. She looked like a zipper. What a mess. She wore a bikini to the beach one time, and the tide wouldn't even come in. I mean, this girl didn't. Not too smart either. She's serving meals to take out. But anyhow, she sat down. There was a vacant seat next to me, and she sat there, and it was still vacant as far as I was concerned. And I told her where I was from, and she told me she was from California. And son of a gun, it rang a bell. Because I'll tell you when this was, about 10 years maybe. It was the time they had the big California property tax bill. And Jarvis, that's the man's name. Jarvis was doing something with property taxes, and Proposition 13 is what it was. And it was very much in the news all over the country. And so I thought, well, that's something we could kick around, because she'd sure something. So I asked her, I said, what do you think about Proposition 13? And, well, yeah, in retrospect, an unfortunate choice of words, I grant you, but, how did I know this dummy didn't? Everybody, the Eskimos knew about it. I mean, everybody knew about the dumb bill, but she didn't. She said she wouldn't comment until she'd heard the other 12. He got us here. I got here. He made a good landing in Denver, incidentally. And less than a mile and a half from the runway, too, right in the same side of town as the airport. Okay, well, we're going, I guess I've told you everything I was going to. We're going on up. We will not go, we're not going any more in that little boat. What happened if you go around Cape Spencer? She's such a long haul to gas. Gas was a big problem. And so we didn't, we turned around and came back to Juneau. We are going to go on north. We're going to go all the way to the Pribilof, but by other means, and indeed any means that comes along. So if you want to turn out the lights, that's approximately, in fact, what we'll, I'm not dead sure what's going to happen, really, but you ever have tight shoes? We went across the same Gulf of Alaska with some fellows that were going to Seward. And we never got to know them too well, but they took us from Juneau across the Gulf, much quieter waters than we had, to Seward. Seward, Alaska is a seaport, about the only honor that was ever awarded a man to whom we owe a great debt. Had it not been for Seward and his insistence that we buy Alaska from Imperial Russia, we could very realistically have the old bear right on the back porch tonight. We owe a great debt, and of course we paid him with sarcasm and criticism and Seward's folly. Remember Seward's icebox, yeah. Well, we leave Seward and we flew now with the bush pilots to Seldovia. Seldovia is a neat and quite unique Alaskan town. It's a fishing town primarily. That does not make it unique, but there are no roads to it. Now there might be now, but they would be very recent, I would think. And the only way you used to be able to go is with a bush plane. There were no scheduled airlines or no scheduled boats. You could go in your own boat or a fishing boat, and that's what it was. But it had a history beyond there. It was founded way back in the not the early, but the 1700s, probably about 1760, before the American Revolutionary War, by the Russians. It was a Russian fortress and a forge. They made anchor chains. And I read stories in history books about how the Russian soldiers would clomp along the streets at night on guard duty. Heavy army boots and every street in town is made of wood, plank, yeah? And they would sing their songs at night because they were lonesome for Mother Russia. Beautiful songs like, Oh, Hammer Sickle Rose was favored, and Wake the Town and Kill the People, and a lot of nice songs. Now we fly from Seldovia. That's Homer, and that's the old Salty Dog Saloon down there, the old Salty Dog. And Homer, Alaska, sits on, well, it was originally founded by a man named Peter Homer, and he landed on the end of it and founded it and tried to find gold, but didn't find any, so some of them homesteaded. This is the tip of the Kenai Peninsula, and that's the Homer Arm you see. It's probably some of the best homesteading potential. People ask me if I know anybody that made a living homesteading in the Kenai or anywhere, and I say I have friends that homesteaded and are doing all right, but all the ones I know also have another iron in the fire. The one I know in Homer is also half interest in a halibut boat, and that's where the cash flow comes from. I mean, we like to have people come and homestead, but we hate to have people come up and go belly up and then come back with a lot of criticism. It's not easy, believe me. You should have another cash income. Just north of Homer is a great arm of the sea that runs many miles east. It's named after an explorer. It's Cook Inlet, named after Captain Cook, who spent much of his life trying to find the Northwest Passage. He sailed east on this one time, day after day, 5 days, and thought he had found a deep water route to the Atlantic. He had not. He came to the end of it on the 6th day. He anchored there, bitterly disappointed. He drew a map, and on the map he put an X, and opposite the X he wrote the single word, Anchorage, to show what purpose he had used this particular spot for. And thus unwittingly, 209 years ago, Captain Cook had named what is now the largest city in Alaska, Anchorage, here at the head of Cook Inlet. And if you look at a very definitive map, look at the very end of Cook Inlet, you'll see there's another arm, another body of water called Turnagain Arm. He named that morning too. He had searched many rivers for this passage. Each time they ended and he had to turn and come back to the sea. And this morning he had to turn again. And he named it Turnagain Arm. It's a pretty city, but it's not Alaska. It's a great place to go to center out, to look at things. Homes are nice, but expensive, $175,000 range here, $200,000 or more for the next one you see here. They're nice homes though, but it's also the saltwater terminus of the Alaskan Railroad. Now this, I'm going to do something, we call this the Inside Passage of Alaska, but I'm going to take you to the interior. The interior just once here to Denali National Park, because the interior of Alaska is very different than the land that lies by the sea. And do go on the Alaskan Railroad to Fairbanks or wherever. We're just going to the park. It's not very fast. In fact, it's very slow, but it's pretty country. And indeed, one day I asked the conductor, I was riding, we were poking along, "Sir," I says, "can't you run any faster than this?" "Well, yes," he said, "I can," but he said, "I have to stay with the train." It stops at Denali National Park. It used to be called McKinley, as you know, and then they take you up to see the highest point in North America, Mount McKinley. Do not go with your heart set on seeing this great mountain. 8 out of 10 people never see it. It's an interesting thing. Its name, the Indians called Denali. That's why they called the park Denali. Denali was their sun god, their storm god, and they thought he lived in this great mountain and created the storms. You can stand and watch it cloud over. It'll cloud over while you're loading your camera. So don't just go just to see the mountain. You may not. Go to see these things. Lots of wildlife that you may never see anywhere else. The Dall sheep, the great white sheep of the north, and these are a beautiful bunch of rams. They're all of them full curl. They're only found in a little spot in Alaska in the Yukon, and you see them strung out along the mountains. And there's something about this particular shot. I just edited this film out in the old house the other day. I chose this shot because it shows the massiveness of Alaska. Look at the mountain and look at the background. It's really a big land, it really is. Probably, undoubtedly, the best chance there ever is to see a live, free-roaming grizzly bear. We have a few in Montana, but they're fewer each year. They're definitely doomed, except for our national parks. The grizzly bear and the caribou. There's a lot of wildlife there that you can see. And the mountains themselves, the McKinley is only one of the mountains of the Alaska Range. Mount Frobisher is 18,000. The wolf is still there, and a good chance to see wolves maybe not at this range, but running, in the mountains, and they're a beautiful wild animal, and not too many of those left either. And bird life, and ducks, and geese, and loons. There's a family of loons often nest on Wonder Lake. That's the lake that's up by Mount McKinley, the great mountain, and there's other nests there too that are a little tougher to get to, the northern loon. But also I wanted to show you the interior. It's very different than the rest of the coast that you see otherwise. They have many mountains about as high as the mountains you have in Washington State and we have in Montana. They get about the same amount of snowpack in the winter, no more than we do, and they have the same degree of heat in the sun in the early spring. But there is one great difference. These mountains, many of them have no trees. So the snow melts rapidly, creates great floods. The floods gouge out the mountains, carry that soil down as sediment in their water. When they get to the level land, the current slows up and they lessens their carrying capacity and they drop the load until the stream bed is higher than the sides and the stream moves over. And over the years, a stream no more than 10 foot wide has devastated the valley a mile wide. And the difference between that and mountains that we have, trees. This is a tree in the north. This is a river in the northwest, a river in heavy timber. I can vouch that it's never flooded its banks in over 66 years. It's never flooded. And it's not the timber right on the bottomlands. It's the timber in the headwaters where the shades the snow and releases it slowly throughout the years. We went back to Anchorage, down to Mount Alyeska, and took the chairlift up to get a view of the mountains. Then Dennis and I got a bush pilot to fly us back into the rugged Chugach Range of mountains to witness one of Mother Nature's more spectacular spectacles, the breakup of Lake George. There's a glacier here called the Knik Glacier. Now during the winter and the freezing weather and the heavy snows, glaciers advance. They actually go forward. And this one goes forward in the winter, far enough that it dams up the Knik River with a mighty ice dam, and the impounded waters behind it become known as Lake George. Then in the heat of the summer, the water warms up and cuts a notch between the mountain I'm standing on. That's where the dam used to come. And then it drains the lake. This is Lake George pouring out the Knik River. And the pilot that flew me in, I took a picture of him as he left to give you a little relativity of size of that wall of ice. And that's a 747, so that is a big wall. It's the only self-dumping lake in the world, we're told. Wall of ice about 500 feet high, and it breaks off here with an absolutely incredible roar. It does, like 1,000 cannon. And right after I had this film, and I had about the only there was on the travel circuit, about some out of unemployed sheep herder went in there with a 2-bit camera and a Mickey Mouse tape recorder and got very similar footage with the sound. And then he sent letters to all the sponsors saying, unlike other speakers who have this footage, I have the sound. You know, unlike that's me, I'm the only other, I mean, and to read his brochures, which are printed on very cheap paper, I'm told, you'd think he created the sound. He didn't create nothing. The sound is there. All I needed is 137 miles of extension cord, and I could have had the sound too. Either that or a set of battery. It's quite a show, it really is. Then in the fall, the whole thing begins rebuilding again. The lake fills once again. Now we go down the Aleutian Islands that separate the Bering Sea from the Pacific Ocean. This was the land of Bob Reeves, and he started an airline down here as a young man, and he had a Fairchild. I used to say Stinson, and today in the afternoon there was a man in the audience that worked with him in those precious years, and they were Fairchilds that he flew, old single engines, and he carried a wheelbarrow, and he built his landing strips, and he made the Reeves Aleutian Airlines that still flies great jets yet today. And there's a great story about him. This is Mr. Reeves not long before he died. And he was flying this, and he flew it for years by the seat of his pants just himself. Then the government got into the picture after everything was all going, and they came up with a lot of regulations. One, he had to have a radio, and he had to ask permission to land on the strip he'd built himself. And he didn't like that. Coming up here one night, the night of our story, up the Aleutians, terrible night, everything wrong. Fog, wind, rain, sleet, the whole ball of wax. And he got on the hated radio and he called the station and he said, turn on the lights, this is Flight 1. And they came back, they said, Flight 1, you cannot land, no visibility. He came on, a few minutes later, they kept doing this. Finally, he came on again, he said, this is Flight 1, turn on the lights. And they said, Flight 1, we told you you can't land. And Reeves came back, hell, he said, I landed 20 minutes ago. Turn on the lights so I can find this stupid hangar. And after the show, there was this delightful man came back. He'd worked with Bob Reeves. He knew all about him, and he told me some great stories. And he remembered this one of the better stories he said. Well, a lot of Alaska and a lot of your own coast here, of course, is volcanic in origin. There was a mighty eruption. There was one we know of, and there have been several recently. But the eruption that created a lot of the Katmai Peninsula, they call the Valley of 10,000 Spokes, was before the white man came to the land. But the Indians remembered it. The Indian legends carried down. They told of a time when the sky was dark for 30 days. There was no light. Ashes from the volcano of Iliamna's eruption. It laid down in a single eruption, a layer of volcanic ash and lava, 700 feet thick. You see it here. And there's a lot of action there yet and steam coming out, hence the name, the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Actually, the Katmai National Monument. And the Indians in the old days wouldn't go there. They thought it was the home of the devil. The Indian name for it in the old days, they called it the land of the floating rocks. It's lava, very porous with air pockets and therefore floats. From here, Dennis and I went to the McNeil River, which is a great haven for the Alaska brown bear. It's a spawning river, of course. An interesting thing happened here. I've seen a lot of bear in my years in Alaska, and I've always noticed that mother bears never let their cubs play with other cubs. Even when it's a single and would really love to go have a playmate, they never allow it. Well, here was an exception. The first day we got there were a number of mothers, but 2 had 3 cubs each. One was a huge bear. This bear will weigh about 700 pounds, they tell me. There was a much smaller mother bear, about 450 pounds, had 3 cubs also. And one day when we were there, the 6 got playing together. And they rolled and tumbled, and they had a ball for an hour. But when it came time to break the party up and go home, the big old bear wouldn't let the other 3 go back to their own mom. What has happened? Animals recognize their own only by scent. A cow, when a calf is born, first thing she does, reach around and sniffs him and locks that into her metal tape, and that's her identification. She'll pick him out of a million. Well, what has happened here? They rolled over and played and wrestled. They all smell alike. Now, she's not a stupid bear. She knows all 6 aren't hers. But she ain't dead sure which 3 are not. So she's keeping the whole ball of wax to make sure she got it. And the little ones try to get back to their mom. You notice this, they know who's who. And they'd make a run for their mom, and this old bear would knock them into her bucket from here to there. Boy, I got mad at her. I told my brother Dennis, I said, go give that miserable old bear a kick in the hind end. I did. I don't care. Doggone it, there's a time in life when you got to stand up and be counted, and I wasn't going to let no old bear scare me. When we left, she still had him. Folks, these are the Aleutian Islands. They're not a terribly pretty part of the world, but they were much beloved by the people that lived here. Now there are 3 different native peoples in Alaska, the Eskimos in the far north, the Indians along the coast and in the interior. But in this chain of islands lived a people, not many in number, called the Aleut or the Aleut. They lived nowhere else in the world. And until 1741, they were the only people that had ever lived here. And they loved these islands. This was their home. Until the Russians came. They came from the Kamchatka Peninsula of Russia and landed somewhere along here. We don't know exactly where. We do know when. In the evening, or towards the evening of August the 17th, in the year 1741. 20 years prior to this, Peter the Great, Tsar of Russia, had been told that many types of foreign vegetation were washing up on the Siberian coast from a land that must lay somewhere to the east. Vegetation unlike what they had. So Peter the Great sent to Denmark and hired the world's leading navigator, a Dane named Vitus Bering, to head up a Russian expedition of 3 ships, sail east and find that land, claim it for Russia, and name it Russian America. Bering sailed and failed, losing ships and men for almost 20 years. 19 years he looked, till he finally landed near this village. And after 19 years plus of searching, he stayed less than 3 hours' time. He built a rock cairn, and in a brief ceremony they claimed this land for Russia, named it Russian America. And as a result, it belonged to Russia for 125 years. And then he sailed, much to the disgust of his crew. Bering was dying of scurvy, and he knew it. He had not seen his family or his home in 20 years. He wanted to go home to die. He sailed that night. He never made it. He died 5 days later. His crew buried him in this sea, and they named the sea in his honor and called it, of course, the Bering Sea. But the crew got back to Russia, and with them they took the fur of a little animal the world had not yet seen. During those brief hours on shore, some of the off-duty sailors went ashore with a stick or a marlin spike and killed these totally unafraid little things, the sea otter, and made a muff for a sweetheart. When the Chinese back in Petrograd saw the fur of the otter, the sea otter, they were ecstatic. They paid great prices, and the Russian government realized in that foggy, forlorn land was gold in the form of fur. So the following year, the Russians came, hundreds of men, to trap the sea otter, and the men, in many cases, married the Aleut women, giving us a race of people. This man is part Aleut and part Russian. You hear the term White Russian a great deal up there. It's a socially acceptable term, the strong, hard-working people. Dennis and I were trying to get to the Pribilof Islands. And this is the Aleutian Island mail boat called the Expansion. And it was going to make it wasn't a regular run, but it's going up to the Pribilof Islands. And we took it out of a place called Cold Bay. And we went, that's the Aleutian Islands, a pretty good shot, best one I got. Often they're foggy, you know, they're foggy and they're stormy, but at any rate, we went north now in the Bering Sea, cold gray sea. It got dismaler each day, and about on the 9th day, I think, they put us ashore here in a couple of, after I saw these islands, it took 5 of his best men to put me ashore, I'll tell you the truth. But the seals love them, the fur seal. It's the only place in the world, well, maybe off the coast of Russia, the Kamchatka Islands, the Russians say produce fur seal. We don't know for sure. But here they come by the thousands. Now, they live here out of choice. They know about a better place, or a different place. You know where they are right now? They're off the coast of Old Mexico, about as far south as Acapulco. In April, the bulls will leave the cows behind and swim back to these islands, and they get there first so they can stake out a place to have a harem when the cows come 3 weeks later. Now, this is a harem, and that's a harem bull, a big, ugly-looking one. And ugly is the term. They have an eternally miserable disposition. And at the end of the season, the average harem bull has 60 cows in his harem, undoubtedly accounting for the eternally miserable disposition. Now, the cows aren't back. See how the bulls have staked out an area? Well, the tougher, bigger bulls stake out right along the coast. That way they get their pick of all these young ladies as soon as they crawl out of the drink. But way back here, it's pretty slim picking. And this guy's getting panicked. He was making a play for me, for crying out loud. Well, he was, doggone. And I had my hair fixed differently then, too. And I looked rather cute that day, I thought. In the background, there's a bull seal. He only has 1 cow in his harem. He ain't going to have her if he doesn't stick pretty close to the homestead. Because this little girl has got sand in her shoes, and she's all for splitting the blankets and going over to that other harem that's got all those other cows. Isn't that a crazy? He got marital problems. There ain't no question about him. And that big guy that keeps running over all, that guy, that ain't no marriage counselor either, I'll tell you for a... Well, I don't know. They're as bad as human. I mean, the other pasture's always greener. I don't know. I tell my boys, by the time you really find a greener pasture, you're too old to climb the fence anyway, you know. So don't spend all life looking for it. Live each day as you... Now the cows come back to these islands about 3 weeks after the bulls. They land, and about 1 week later, they give birth to the seal pups. And these poor little newcomers, they look not entirely pleased. I feel sorry for them. They're born right on the edge of the Bering Sea in crashing cold water. They don't have a fur coat, and they're cold, and they don't know how to swim. They're not into water sports yet, and they try to get inland, and it's pretty coarse sand. It's a kind of a rough start. Thank heaven for their mother. There's a great love between a pup and his mother. I've seen them sometimes, and you can almost feel the warmth radiate 100 yards against the wind. And if they didn't have her, they would have nothing, because they sure have no daddy. I tell you, what a bunch of chauvinist pigs they are. I mean, I saw a big bull one day. He was chasing a cow, and he ran right through about 20 little pups, and he just knocked them galley west. He didn't even slow down. The big fat head, it really got to me. I told my brother, I said, if he does that again, you go over there and punch him out, because I don't take much off a bull seal either, not when they're... And they're fighting for space. That's what it's all about. This is a bachelor bull. He really doesn't know how well off he is. You know? Now, on one of the islands, they have the stellar sea lion, great, huge things. Interesting little note. The Russians discovered Alaska. It was a Russian expedition. But the navigator was a Dane, Vitus Bering, and the chief biologist was a German, Wilhelm Steller. And he saw and classified these, the largest of the sea lion family, the stellar sea lion. He classified many things. We have a blue jay. I think you might too. We call it a blue jay, but that's not really right. It's a Steller's jay, the cocky little one, you know. Same man. And they have the sea parrot there. Not many birds there. They have some puffins. There's several types of puffin, but this is what they call They call this a huffin' puffin'. It's a very short-winded burn. Now we went back with Reeves Airlines to Dutch Harbor, and then we took the mailboat to Kodiak. This is the town of Kodiak on the island of Kodiak. Kodiak is not one of the Aleutian Islands, folks. It's an island nearer the mainland. It's the oldest Caucasian community in Alaska, settled by the Russians in 1751, before the American Revolution even. Heavy Russian atmosphere, Russian street names. You see, it was a sad chapter for the natives. The Russians came and took by war the mainland from the Indian. It was many years of war. Sad not only for the Indian that fought and died and lost his homeland, but sad for many of the Russians, because most of these Russians did come against their will. They were sent by the government to start an agrarian community, almost as cattle would be sent. And they too fought and died, and were buried far from home and loved ones on a cold, hostile shore. This girl was royal blood. Notice the name, the princess she was. Can't pronounce her name. She married to a captain. And I did a little research, and they think that she was the daughter of the Tsar of Russia, Peter the Great, but not by the Empress. He evidently played around a little, and they say that that might have been one way to get, she was kind of a thorn in the side of the family, but she was a princess. But they sent her over here with her husband. She had consumption. She died when she was 28 years old. Dennis and I out of Kodiak got a job on a king crab boat. Dennis went to work on the Gertrude Ann, and I went to work on the Kodiak. This is the king crab. You know, the boy holding me, incidentally, is an Aleut. There aren't many left. When the Russians first came, a Russian chronologer estimated there were 40,000 Aleut people, and I think there's less than 2,000 now. Hate to see them leave. They're a handsome people and very outgoing, quite a personable native. But at any rate, the skipper's name is Tim, and the boy's name is Steve. And normally it's just two men, but when a lot of crab are being caught, they'll put on extra help. And then they have 20 crab pots, normally 20 up to 24, and they set each crab pot each day. And they lift each crab pot each day too. Now, they have to put fresh bait in it each day. A crab, a king crab he's such a hideous thing. He looks like he'd eat anything that didn't eat him first, you know. But not true. They're quite particular. Halibut is good, but if it's over 24 hours old, they won't touch it. And each day, and they take out the big crabs, put them in the hold, and throw the little ones back. And this is really grassroots conservation, and they were very good about it. I think we're getting the idea that if we just grab the money and run, it'll be all right where we're here. But our kids and their grandkids are going to have pretty slim pickings, you know. And that's a king crab. And they take them right in. They take them right into Kodiak. They go out about 4 in the morning, and they get back by noon or earlier, and they go right to the cold storage plant, and they freeze them, and then they load them on airplanes and fly them out to the big cities that day. You could have king crab in Seattle that was caught, you know, within a 24-hour period ahead of time. And we set each trap and bait it and set it back. And if you're pulling up traps where there are too many little ones or not enough of any, then you don't set the trap there again. You pick out a new spot. But if it's doing well, you put it by. And then Tim quit fishing for a while, or quit crabbing, and so I was unemployed, and I went and stayed in the Kodiak Hotel. I was in the lobby one day, and a long-time friend of mine came in, Earl Fleming. Earl has worked as a logger and a miner and a school teacher, but this summer he had a job, not this past summer, but the summer I took this, he had a job for the Fish and Wildlife Service. He had a cabin in the middle of Kodiak Island. That's not the ocean. That's a freshwater lake. That's Karluk Lake in Kodiak Island. Kodiak's a big island. And his job was catching the Kodiak in a live trap. You just put a piece of meat in a kind of a little house, and the bear goes in, pulls on the meat, and the door closes. He's not hurt. Then you chloroform him and measure him. They're trying to, and the first night I woke up, I couldn't even eat breakfast. I wanted to see what kind of a looking bear. And the trap was sprung, and I was frankly disappointed. It looked a great deal like a fox. It had long ears and nose. We had the same fox every morning, 4 mornings in a row. He went in and he pulled on the meat, the door closed. He didn't give a hoot. He lay down, ate the meat, took a snooze. We came along and turned him loose. He thought he had gone to heaven. I think he was in fox heaven, yeah. One morning he slept in, we caught a bear and we chloroformed him, tag his ears, Earl did, I didn't, and weighed him and trying to make some legislation, and we put red dye so we know we've already worked on this bear. He reminded me of old Arnie trying to get back to logging camp from town on Monday morning. Earl had been there. He just came into town to get the mail, and he had a baby eagle that had fallen out of the nest, and his parents abandoned him in May. And he and Earl got along good, but a baby eagle learns to fly by watching his parents, you know. And all Earl did just walk along, and he just walked along behind Earl, and he was well enough adjusted, but I told him, I said, unless we do something, we'll end up with the only walking eagle in Alaska. So I got down on my haunches the very first day, right in front of him, about 5 feet, I started flapping my arms, and he started flapping his. He did. And we do that every day about, 4 or 5 hours, I guess, a lot of them. And boy, after about 2 weeks, man, I was flying all over the island. But Napoleon wasn't doing too well. Tell him at the seagulls, and that's the last. It's the morning of the storm. See the fresh snow? A storm hit. You could feel the wind hit that cabin about 3:30 in the morning, woke us up. And Earl came over and was going to wake me up. Koopy said, we got to get out of here at daylight. He said, if we're still here tonight, we'll still be here next May. And this was early September, so we got out. Look at the fish, honestly, salmon. It's a time of great change, the north, and things go home and dormant and hibernate. I want you to know you can go up on the Inside Passage in luxury, and you can, if you want, start that trip in San Francisco, where we're on the Royal Viking Star and leaving right now. I do not recommend this. You go out under the Golden Gate Bridge. But this one trip did it, and I'd hired out. I used to take trips up the passage, and I didn't know till 3 days ahead it was starting in San Francisco. See, that ain't the Inside Passage, and besides that, if you like open water and shipboard life, it's a nice trip. But if you get seasick like I do, it's a holy terror. I'll tell you the truth. All you can do is watch the frigate birds. They're kind of pretty, though. They go clear across the ocean sometimes and never flap their arms, the old sailors say. Just riding the air currents. But at any rate, I was sick. I sat in a green deck chair 3 days, and nobody even saw me. People kept sitting on my lap, you know. And they tell you that it's got a stabilizer and the ship won't roll. Well, my foot, it won't roll. Look at that sucker roll. And what they mean is the ship won't roll over is what they mean. Columbus was not as glad to see the West Indies as I was to see Vancouver. I'll tell you the truth. Now, see, all of that is outside. Here is the place I recommend you start. Your Inside Passage cruise, Vancouver, and you can start. And do take the city tour. You know, if you would take a Seattle city tour, I don't care if you've lived here all your life, you'll see something new and interesting. They are really crammed with information. I always do that when we go to a town, my family, and then we go back to the spots we like the best. Go to the Queen Elizabeth Gardens, and then go up the real Inside Passage. The real Inside Passage starts in Seattle, right out here in your own Puget Sound, named after Peter Puget, a British explorer who was also looking for the Inside Passage, and goes up through the Grenville Narrows. See how you are protected, and look at that water, just flatter than a platter. The nice thing about this passage is the fact that, well, everything is so close. The forest comes right down to the edge of the ship, and it lays like a great green carpet over the world in all directions. And you stop in all, well, not in all, but every cruise ship stops in at least 3 or 4 towns. This is Juneau. This is our capital. And this is where Arnie and I would come. Generally, we log in the area. And old Arnie would come to town, and he'd get 10 sheets in the wind and go down to the old Red Dog Saloon, you know. He went in there one night, and he'd had it, you know, and he went in. Sam, he said to the bartender, was Coop in here earlier this evening? And Sam said, yes, Arnie, he was here all right. And Arnie said, you didn't happen to notice whether or not I was with him? When you choose a ship, you want to shop around. It's nice if you can get one that goes to Glacier Bay. Not all do, and it is a lovely, lovely trip. This same bay Dennis and I went to, you can go there on a cruise ship, and it lays there for quite a while, and you watch the glaciers sliding down, and if you're there on a nice day, or even on a bad day, it has a certain chemistry then. And we were there, and the glaciers do come and break off, accounting for the ice that you see in the water. Now, let me say this, the ferries, you can also go up on a ferry, folks. There's a little seal there. But if you do, you can take your car or motorhome. And a ferry is a delightful way to go, but it does not stop here. Look at the color-coordinated blouses. I don't know if it was intentional, but it's surely effective. Maybe the only chance you'll have in your life to wake up in the morning, look out the bedroom window at a great wall of ice. And here's where we saw the Princeton Dam. Beautiful, very luxurious, smaller cruise boat. And this was the trip before the one in which she sank. Remember, a few years ago? She sank in the Gulf of Alaska, yes, she did, at night in a violent storm, and the United States Coast Guard took 500 people off that in the dead of night in a storm. Never lost a soul. There was a bad rock in a channel called Ripple Rock, and on foggy days, the boats afraid of the middle of the channel and the rock would crowd the edge, which is understandable, but this is overcrowding here, all right. And it's a sloppy job of docking, really. It's the Princess Kathleen, a beautiful cruise ship. Going down. And the Canadian government is very much in favor of building tourism. So they took a survey, they took a vote of the people that had been on there, and I don't know, big percent, 82% or 81%, something, of the people. At any rate, they said they felt that the cruise would have been more pleasant if the ship hadn't sank. And, well, you know what nitpickers people are when they're paying for it. I mean, so the Canadian government blasted. You remember Ripple Rock? Remember that was several years ago? Well, at that time in my life, I was going into documentary films with another guy. It went over like a lead balloon, but we do have some footage of this job, and taken mostly by the other guy. But what they did is they were going to blast Ripple Rock out of the Narrows. See, it was only at low tide 27 inches below the surface. It made a ripple. It was number 4 on Lloyd's of London's list of bad spots. It wasn't a rock, it was a mountain, a huge mountain under the sea. So they dug a big shaft and a tunnel under the ocean, came up with twin shafts right in the middle of it. And I happened to be down there one day when they broke through, and that was the ocean coming through. They only got a little shell of rock around them. And I told them, if you go any further that way, you're going to drain somebody's swimming pool in the Japanese islands, because it's a lot of water up there. And then it took them 6 years to drill it, and it took them 6 months to load the dynamite. Notice they're wearing hard hats. That's in case it goes up prematurely. Now, that's a government plan. And we put our initials on our cameras. CBC stands for Cooper Brothers Cameras, one for each of his sides. I show you all the rest of that just so I can show you this shot. I love it, don't you? What a blast. Well, it blew a mountain of rock. See, the rock was millions of tons of rock under millions of tons of water, or at least that's what they said. And so it was and people came, our Navy went, lots of people went up just to see Ripple Rock get its everlasting. Now you can go on a ferry, and you can go up to Haines, take your car if you want, and get off at Haines or Skagway, and drive back on the Alaskan Highway. And that's a neat way to do it too, folks. One way by water, one way by wheels. The highway is partly oiled, mostly oiled now. I guess it doesn't make too much difference how you go. The important thing is that I hope most of you can go to Alaska, because I can promise you one thing. When you come back, you're going to have a different, a more involved, a more personal touch with this great northern state. One of the troubles in trying to save what is undeniably our last really large wilderness. When this one's gone, there ain't no more as far as we're concerned. Trouble with saving it is the people down in the States do not feel that's really part of us. They feel maybe it's on Mars. But the truth is, there'll come a time, the great grizzly bear, it's one of the last havens. Without Alaska, they are doomed within a few years. And we kill the grizzly because they fight us, but they're fighting for their space. They were here first. The very attributes we hold so dear in ourselves, you know, we kill them for doing the same thing. A lot of animals, of course, are gone. Others are moving back. As civilization moves out, as people move out, the wild things move back. That's how it's always been. The problem now is there's no back to move to anymore. For some are on the perimeter. One more push is a final and totally irrevocable push into oblivion. That's the reason the buck stops with us for many cases. We have to, from this point forward, learn how to enjoy our wilderness without having to possess it. You can enjoy it and still pass at least a share along to those that follow us down the trail. You have been just a simply terrific audience, as you always are. Thank you for coming, and God bless you all.